My husband of 3 years suddenly excluded me from his high school reunion trip, claiming that there had been last-minute changes and no spouses were allowed. I didn't question it at first, assuming he was being honest. However, I later discovered that he had blatantly lied. Every spouse had gone, including his newly divorced high school sweetheart. To make matters worse, he posed happily in pictures with her throughout the trip. So, I decided to return the favor in the best way possible. I filed for divorce, giving them the perfect chance to rekindle their old romance. But as it turns out, she was only using him as a free wallet during the trip. Now, he's crawling back, begging for another chance. 2 months ago, my husband, Dan, told me about a trip he was planning with his high school friends. It was meant to be an informal reunion, and he invited me to come along. I agreed without hesitation. However, about 2 weeks before the trip, he claimed that plans had changed and that no spouses would be joining. While I was a bit disappointed, I didn't think much of it because I trusted him. That trust shattered when I found out he had lied. Not only did every spouse go, but he had also spent nearly the entire trip with his high school ex, Rachel. I wouldn't have known if it weren't for Amy, one of his old friends, who reached out to me on social media on the 3rd day of the trip. She hesitated at first, saying it wasn't really her place, but she felt I should know. She had witnessed Dan and Rachel sneaking into her hotel room while everyone else was out. Something about the situation unsettled her, so she decided to tell me. I was blindsided. Dan and I had been in a happy marriage, or at least, that's what I believed. We weren't having any problems, and I had never once suspected him of being unfaithful. I didn't know how to respond to Amy, so I left her message unanswered. Instead, I called Dan, desperate for some kind of explanation. He answered, clearly intoxicated, but I still tried to keep things casual. I asked if he was having fun before jokingly inquiring if any high school exes had joined the trip. His reaction said it all. There was a brief silence before he awkwardly laughed and assured me that he had only dated one girl in high school, and she wasn't there. That was the moment I knew Amy was telling the truth. Without saying another word, I hung up and immediately started packing my things. I moved in with my parents that same night, refusing to sit around and wonder what else he might be lying about. For the next few days, I kept myself busy, trying not to dwell on the betrayal. But deep down, I already knew what I had to do. The very next day, I reached out to my brother, who happens to be a divorce lawyer. I laid everything out for him, explaining the entire situation, and told him that I was ready to move forward with the divorce. However, my brother hesitated. He thought I was rushing into this decision too quickly, and now Dan is clinging to that same argument, insisting that I'm throwing away our marriage without giving him a chance. I had found out about Rachel being on the trip on the 3rd day, thanks to Amy's message. Dan, on the other hand, didn't return home until several days later. By the time he did, I had already moved out, staying at my parents' house, and had spoken to my brother about starting the divorce process. When Dan arrived home and realized I was gone, he bombarded me with calls and texts. But here's the thing, before that, after my last phone call with him, he hadn't reached out to me even once. Not a single message, not a single call. And now, all of a sudden, he was desperate to get in touch. I finally responded, keeping it brief. I told him I had spoken to Amy, and she had informed me that he had been spending all of his time with Rachel, that they had even sneaked into her hotel room when no one was watching. Knowing all of that, I had no reason to stay in this marriage anymore. I told him I had moved out, consulted my brother, and that I was filing for divorce. Then, I blocked him. I didn't care to hear whatever excuse he might come up with. That evening, he showed up at my parents' house, begging to see me. I had already told my parents that I wanted nothing to do with him, so they tried to get him to leave. But he refused. He stood outside, pleading, until I finally agreed to talk to him, if only to make him go away and stop disturbing my family. The moment he saw me, he dropped to his knees, sobbing. He admitted he had screwed up and that he knew it, but he begged for another chance to make things right. The fact that he didn't even try to deny anything shattered what little was left of my trust. I told him I wanted nothing more to do with him. But before I could even finish, he jumped in with an explanation. He swore that nothing had happened in the hotel room, that Rachel had only gone inside to borrow some cash from him. Since he had left his wallet there, they had to go back for it. According to him, Amy must not have seen them return, which is why she got the wrong idea. Then came the real confession. He admitted that he had, in fact, spent nearly all of his time with Rachel. But he insisted it was only because she had recently gotten divorced and had sought him out for support. He claimed they had only been together in a platonic way and that he hadn't told me about it because he didn't want me to feel insecure. He never realized that lying would only make things worse. That wasn't the end of it for me, though. After Amy had initially reached out, I messaged her again to thank her. During our conversation, she mentioned something that shocked me even more. She had found it suspicious from the very beginning that everyone else had brought their spouses along except for me. That alone made her feel like something was off. As we kept talking, I learned something even worse. Dan had lied to everyone, telling them that I couldn't come because I had to leave for an emergency work trip. That was when it all clicked. I realized he had deliberately excluded me from the trip. My guess? He must have found out beforehand that Rachel would be there and, now that she was divorced, decided he didn't want me around. I confronted him about this while he was still pleading with me, insisting that his time with Rachel had been purely platonic. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he admitted that he had known about Rachel's divorce beforehand, and that was a major reason he didn't want me on the trip. But, according to him, it wasn't because he was trying to pursue her. He claimed he only wanted to avoid the awkwardness of having both his wife and his ex in the same place, given that they had dated for years and their breakup had been sudden. He said he just wanted to relax and enjoy the trip, and having me there would have made things too uncomfortable for him. Then, as if trying to justify himself further, he told me that even if they had spent time together, he was completely done with Rachel now. He called her a gold digger, saying she had used him the entire trip, making him pay for everything. Whenever he hesitated, she would bring up her heartbreaking divorce, telling him how much she just needed a break from all the stress. Apparently, she had joined the trip last minute despite not having any money of her own, having been a stay-at-home mom. He felt bad for her and let her take advantage of him financially. But now he was certain he wouldn't even stay in touch with her, let alone consider anything romantic. As he poured all of this out, he was still on his knees, visibly emotional. Seeing him like that made it incredibly difficult for me to hold back my own emotions, but I still didn't know what to say. I finally told him that I needed time to think about everything, but, in the meantime, I wanted him to leave. At first, he refused. He kept saying he wasn't going home without me, that he loved me, and that he couldn't live without me. But somehow, I managed to convince him to go, at least for now, so I could have some space to process everything on my own. It's been several days since then, and I've spoken to my brother again. He's put the divorce process on hold for me, so we haven't officially filed the petition yet, but it's ready whenever I decide to move forward. The problem is, I don't even know what I want anymore. On one hand, all I really have is Amy's word, but that could easily be confirmed if I reached out to a few other people who were on the trip. I just haven't done that yet because I don't want to drag more people into this. On the other hand, Dan and I have had a happy marriage up until now. Maybe he's right. Maybe I shouldn't just throw everything away over this. Maybe marriage counseling could help. But the thing I can't shake is the lying. He didn't just lie once. He lied over and over again. And if he truly had nothing to hide, why would he go through all that trouble to deceive me? That's the part one can't seem to move past. I don't want to be the one making a rash decision, but I also don't know how to trust him again. Am I wrong for wanting a divorce over this? Edit. For those wondering, Amy is someone I completely trust. Dan doesn't have many high school friends he still keeps in touch with, and Amy is one of the few. She was even at our wedding and has known me for years, so she has absolutely no reason to lie. Apart from her, Dan has two other close high school friends, and I had considered asking them about what really happened on the trip, but I found out that neither of them had even gone because they were busy with work. So, at this point, all I really have to go on is Amy's word, but I trust her. And honestly, Dan has already admitted to everything, so why would I doubt her? At the end of the day, this isn't about whether Dan is telling the truth now. It's about the fact that he lied in the first place, and that's what ruined everything. Update 1. I've made up my mind. I'm going through with the divorce. It's been a couple of days since my last post, and after thinking it all through, I've realized that I can't just sweep this under the rug and pretend everything is fine. He didn't just lie about one thing. He lied about multiple things. And the worst part? He knew how much I struggled with trust issues because of past experiences with cheating. He was fully aware of that, yet he still chose to lie to me. I've given him 5 years of my life, and I trusted him completely. But I can't ignore what's right in front of me. Deep down, I've always known that he had a soft spot for Rachel. When we first started dating, he talked about her a lot, which wasn't surprising since they had only been broken up for 3 years at that point, and she had just gotten married. But over time, he seemed to talk about her less and less, and I assumed he had finally moved on. Clearly, I was wrong. Now, looking back, I just feel like a fool. I've been confiding in Amy about all of this because I don't feel ready to talk to my friends yet, and she's the only one who already knows everything. Even though she's been a good friend to Dan, she didn't sugarcoat anything. She admitted that he had completely screwed up on a massive scale. I also asked her about something that had been bothering me. Was it true that Dan and Rachel had only been in the hotel room for a few seconds, like he claimed? Amy shut that down immediately. She told me she had kept track of their comings and goings, and they had been in the room for more than half an hour. She even got her husband to back her up, since she had mentioned it to him at the time. And honestly, I have no reason to doubt them. They have nothing to gain by lying, and that was all I needed to hear to solidify my decision. So, I told my brother everything, and he's officially filing the divorce petition tomorrow. Dan has been texting me from a burner phone, and while I haven't blocked him yet, I plan to do so after tomorrow. I won't lie, this has been incredibly hard to come to terms with. Spending years with someone isn't a small thing, and letting go feels unbearable. But after everything that's happened, it's clear to me that those years must not have meant as much to him as they did to me. That realization hurts more than anything. I can't even begin to put into words what I'm going through right now. But if there's one silver lining, it's that I have my family by my side. And soon enough, when I'm ready to tell my friends, I know they'll support me too. I just hope the divorce process is smooth because the last thing I need right now is more drama. Update 2. I finally opened up to my friends about everything, and their support has been overwhelming. They reassured me that I made the right decision, and honestly, their perspective helped so much. After I laid out the whole situation, they pointed out just how shady Dan's actions were, finding out at the last minute that Rachel was coming, and then suddenly making sure I wasn't on the trip, lying to me about her even being there, and then covering up how much time he spent with her. It was all just suspicious. Hearing them say that reaffirmed what I already knew. I wasn't overreacting, and one incident is enough to end a marriage when it's built on lies. Feeling more confident in my decision, I finally replied to the texts Dan had been sending me from his burner phone. I told him that my mind was made up. There was no changing it. I had taken my time, thought long and hard about everything, and I knew I couldn't move past this. I made it clear that I didn't want him to contact me again. I was also worried that he might show up at my parents' house again, so I warned him that I didn't even want to see him in person. I told him that if he truly wanted to show that he was sorry, then he should respect my wishes and let the divorce process move forward without interference. Then, I blocked his burner number 2. And now, I can finally start moving on. But of course, Dan couldn't just let things be. Instead of respecting my boundaries, he created a new Facebook account just to message me again. This time, he went on about how I couldn't just throw away years of marriage over what he called one stupid little mistake. He insisted that even though he had lied, it had been for my own good, because he didn't want me to feel insecure, and he didn't want the trip to be awkward. He had already given me this excuse before, and I still didn't buy it. Then he tried to convince me, again, that everything with Rachel had been purely platonic and that I needed to trust him on that. According to him, Amy didn't actually know what was going on, and I was blindly trusting her over my own husband. But at this point, I did trust her more than him, and nothing he said could change that. He also brought up the fact that Rachel had only been using him for his money, and that since coming back, he hadn't even spoken to her. I suppose he thought that would somehow make me feel better, but it only made things worse. If Rachel hadn't used him for his money, would he have kept in touch with her? Would he have risked our marriage for her? Because that's exactly what it sounded like. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. He still wasn't over her. And if that was the case, then the past few years had been a complete waste of my time. I didn't bother replying. I just blocked that account too. At this point, he has already been served, and in a couple of weeks, he'll have to respond to the divorce petition. Whatever he has to say, he can say it during mediation. Outside of that, I have no interest in talking to him. For now, I'm still staying with my parents, but I don't want this to be a long-term arrangement. I have no idea how long the divorce will take, but I know I need my own space. My parents have assured me that I'm welcome to stay as long as I need, but I want my independence back. It's been so long since I lived alone, and I think it's time to start that process again. I've already started looking for apartments near my workplace, hoping to find something soon. My friends have also offered to help me with my move, especially since I still have a lot of things at the house. But honestly, I dread going back there myself. The idea of seeing Dan in person right now is unbearable. So, a couple of my friends have volunteered to go collect my stuff for me. I haven't decided yet if I'll take them up on the offer because I don't know how Dan will react. Based on the tone of his last messages, he already sounded irritated with me, and I don't want my friends to have to deal with his attitude. But I also don't want to set foot in that house ever again. I'll have to figure it out soon, though, because once I'm out of here, I'm not looking back. That's another thing I just can't wrap my head around. Why is he acting annoyed when he should be remorseful for lying to me over and over again? His irritation makes it seem like I'm the one overreacting, while he's being completely reasonable. At first, he was deeply apologetic, crying, begging, saying all the right things. But the moment he realized that I wasn't going to change my mind, his entire attitude shifted. That just confirms what I already suspected. He wasn't actually sorry for what he did. He was just upset that he got caught. It makes even more sense now that I've found out he cut Amy off completely. Not only that, but he sent her and her husband a nasty email, which Amy later forwarded to me. In it, he accused them of stirring up drama and meddling by telling me the truth, as if he wasn't the one who caused all of this in the first place. Amy was really hurt by his reaction. They used to be close, but she wasn't about to stand by and watch him screw me over. And honestly, that just proves her character. She chose morality over a friendship, and that's what set him off. Not because she was wrong, but because she refused to enable his lies. So in the end, it doesn't really matter. Update. Hey, it's been a few weeks since my last update, and Dan has finally responded to my divorce petition. Surprisingly, he's not contesting it. In fact, he's agreed to all my terms, which means we might not even need mediation. I won't lie, I was a little shocked at first. It's not like we've had zero contact over the past 2 weeks. In my last update, I mentioned that I wanted to move out of my parents' house, but unfortunately, I haven't found a suitable apartment yet, so I'm still here. And then, a couple of days after my last update, Dan showed up again. This time, my parents weren't home. They had gone out for dinner, and I had stayed behind because I was feeling emotionally drained. In hindsight, I really wish I had gone with them. Then I wouldn't have had to deal with him. When I saw Dan standing outside, I didn't even hesitate. I told him right away that I wasn't letting him in and that he needed to leave because I had nothing left to say to him. But for some reason, he has this ridiculous idea that he can win me back with some dramatic, over-the-top gesture. The last time he pulled this stunt, he got down on his knees, sobbing like he was in a movie. And I'll admit, I almost fell for it. Not because I believed him, but because I was still struggling to accept the reality of the situation. But that's no longer the case. This time, he decided he would stand outside my door all night if that's what it took for me to forgive him. He started making all these grand declarations about how much he loved me, how I was making a huge mistake by letting him go over something so small. He insisted that no one could ever love me the way he did, and that the whole thing with Rachel had just been a mistake, one that he was willing to change for. According to him, all I had to do was forgive him. But I told him straight up, I had no intention of forgiving him, so he might as well leave. I wasn't even taking him seriously at this point. I just wanted him to go away so I could get back to scrolling on my phone. When it became clear that he wasn't planning on leaving on his own, I decided to have a little fun with it. I bluffed and pretended to call the cops on him. I made a whole show out of it, spoke loudly on the phone, acted serious, because honestly, I was bored and curious to see his reaction. The moment he heard me, he started freaking out, yelling at me, asking if I was actually serious. I kept up the act, pretending I had really called the cops, and the next thing I knew, he was cursing at me. Within minutes, he jumped in his car and sped off. It was hilarious, and I'm pretty sure that little stunt played a part in why he ultimately chose not to contest the divorce. He probably figured out later that I never actually called the cops, but by then, the damage to his ego was already done. A few days after that, I decided to send a couple of my friends to pick up my belongings from his house so I could finally bring everything here and start preparing to move out permanently. Just as I had feared, he acted like a complete child. First, he accused them of being thieves. He started yelling, saying that under no circumstances would he let them into his house. My friends had no choice but to call me, so they put me on speakerphone with him. I reminded him, very clearly, that I had paid my share of the rent, and if he tried to keep my things from me, I would sue him. That led to a heated argument over the phone, but eventually, he backed down and let them in. Even then, he didn't stop being weird. The whole time my friends were packing up my stuff, he followed them around, watching their every move and mumbling about me under his breath, as if that was somehow going to make me feel guilty. Instead, it just made him look ridiculous. My friends told me afterward that the whole thing was so bizarre that they actually think he's lost it a little. And honestly, I don't even blame them. His behavior lately has been so immature and embarrassing. I would feel bad for him, but at the end of the day, this is all his fault. He could have owned up to his mistakes with dignity, but instead, he chose to act like a teenager throwing a tantrum. That's his decision. I'm not responsible for his inability to handle consequences. If anything, his antics have only made me more confident in my decision to leave. There are 0 second thoughts now. If this is the kind of person he truly is, then I don't regret walking away one bit. And honestly, it's not like this childish behavior is brand new. Even when we were happy, he had a petty streak that would come out whenever he got mad at me. But back then, I was in love with him, so I overlooked it. It wasn't this bad. Now, he's just embarrassing. At this point, I'm not even upset anymore. A couple of weeks ago, when I first found out, I was devastated. Now, I feel relieved. I'm getting out while I still can. And more than anything, I'm grateful that I only wasted a few years on him, because I had been seriously considering having kids with this man. If that had happened, this whole situation would have been so much harder. But thankfully, I get to walk away before it turned into an even bigger nightmare. Honestly, I couldn't be happier to be leaving him behind. Update. Well, here's an interesting update for you guys. It's been 4 weeks since my last post, and I've officially moved out of my parents' house. I'm now living in my own apartment, settling into my new space, and doing my best to move on from everything. Honestly, it's been easier than I expected, mostly because I've had 0 contact with Dan. But, of course, he just couldn't help himself. A couple of days ago, he decided to email me out of the blue. And let me tell you, it was pathetic. The entire email was basically him bragging about how relieved he was to be getting divorced. According to him, I was never the right kind of woman for him. And if one stupid little incident was enough to drive me away, then I was the one with issues, not him. Then came the classic bitter ex move. A long, self-righteous rant about how I'm a fool, I have a huge ego, and that no one will ever love me. Blah, blah, blah. I didn't even need to finish reading to know exactly where he was going with it. But here's where it gets good. Towards the end of the email, he finally admitted that he had hooked up with Rachel on the trip. He even bragged about how grateful he was that he went alone, because otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to spend all that time with her. So, there it was, the confirmation I had known deep down all along. Amy had been telling me the truth, and Dan had been lying straight to my face. For a second, I felt furious. The way he was gloating about it was infuriating. But then I took a step back and realized something. The fact that he is who he is, that's his punishment. I didn't respond to his email because I knew that's exactly what he wanted, a reaction. I could have tried to make his life miserable during the divorce process, but honestly, I don't care enough to do that. All that's left now is to get through the mandatory waiting period, and then we'll both be free. And I have 0 interest in dragging this out with more unnecessary drama. At this point, I don't care if he hooked up with 10 other women. He's out of my life, and that's all that matters to me. Because even without him, I still have real love in my life, my friends, my family, and even my career, which has been going great lately. I'm good. I'm moving forward. And I have absolutely no regrets. Stay tuned for more stories.